Okay, now, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger approves of the IMF structural adjustment and USAID programs. He once, which is the main source for genetic engineering and pesticides around the world, he once portrayed American aid this way: to give food aid to a country just because they are starving is a pretty weak reason. Kissinger is the instrument, the person who helped manufacture U.S. foreign policy for 5 decades now. And to think that he's right in what he says here. Not morally right, but he's right that this is what U.S. aid is about. It's about ways of taking over land in other countries, booting people off their land. We're not giving them food aid to feed them. We're giving it for other reasons. So for Kissinger, food is to be used as a weapon in the achievement of U.S. foreign policy objectives. And so the United States systematically dumps cheap, genetically engineered products saturated with pesticides on foreign markets, undermining local producers and forcing them to purchase the patented seeds from the company manufacturing them. They're not allowed to replant them, along with the pesticides needed to kill off the plant's competitors. Driven from their lands, local producers become dependent on the United States and its corporations, and a number of them try to flee across the border to the United States. On the other hand, people know Anthony Bourdain, the world-famous chef who died, was it last year? I'm not going to speculate here for the purposes of this talk. He wrote, once you've been to Cambodia, and who knew this about Anthony Bourdain? Once you've been to Cambodia, you'll never stop wanting to beat Henry Kissinger to death with your bare hands. You will never again be able to open a newspaper and read about that treacherous, prevaricating, murderous scumbag sitting down for a nice chat with Charlie Rose and attending some black tie affair for a new glossy magazine without choking. Witness what Henry did in Cambodia, the fruits of his genius for gamesmanship. And you'll never understand why he's not sitting in the deck in The Hague next to Milosevic. Shortly before he died, and we can all speculate about all sorts of things from that. This is a piece I wrote, which is, some of it is reprinted in the book, called West Nile, The West Nile Story, in which in New York we blocked the spray trucks, we went the lawsuits route. It's really important for activists. Many of the mainstream environmental groups refused to help us to stop the spraying, whether it was NRDC, went and visited them like half a dozen times. No. There were other mainstream groups, large corporate mainstream groups, environmental groups. They didn't want to touch it. And then, anyway, this is, who is this? Yes, this is Rachel Carson, true hero of our movement. Her book in 1962, Silent Spring, intersected with the mass movement that was happening at the time. One of the things to learn from that movement against DDT and for the banning of DDT in the United States, which involved all these people marching. I mean, it was, her story was put out week by week in the New Yorker. And so people read it in sequels rather than all at once before the whole book came out. And it was quite incredible that she kept going and analyzing what was going on. But also, are people aware that it wasn't only about DDT? It was also about the nuclear bomb testing as a result of the Cold War in the United States, which was poisoning, the strontium-90 levels were poisoning the children throughout the country, the milk supply throughout the country. And that was a fundamental part, along with DDT, of what Rachel Carson and the movement were demanding and marching and mobilizing everywhere. And it was, again, many, many young women who were part of this movement. There were men, too, who were part of it, but it was initiated by women, again. So I always like to remember Rachel Carson. Now this, okay. We're coming near the end, and I wanted to mention, this is the FDA badge, the Food and Drug Administration badge. It is actual badge that we stole, liberated from the FDA officials at one point. Well, we say that FDA means for direct action. And people in Boston and in other parts of Massachusetts took these. You notice the picture proves who you are, right? It's the picture. And it's signed by the Commissioner of Health at the time and the Commissioner of the FDA at the time. And they went into, I was not part of this particular one, they went into stores throughout the area dressed in zoot suit, in those radiation suits, and went in with Geiger counters and everything, and would say, sorry, we have to shut down your store. You have to get rid of these. You have to get rid of these products, and shut down, or else shut down the store. And it was whatever products that they knew were genetically engineered. So they went to product after product after product and told the store managers to get rid of them. And they had the official badge, and here's my proof. And of course, they see their picture, so of course it's true. And and they managed to succeed in shutting down several stores. In Tennessee, these type of creative actions are going on everywhere. In Tennessee, there was another small group of activists who decided to rewrite the law book. So you know those McKinney law, their black leather-bound law books. So they got one, and they rewrote the first few pages of it, and they just inserted it nicely so it looked real. And it said on number 1, you cannot sell food that has been derived from genetically engineered products, crops, or bovine growth hormone in the store. And they shut down store after store after store in Tennessee. The owner of the store would come up and say, well, it doesn't say that. That's not in the law. What are you talking about? And they say, yes, it is. Here's the law. And they'd open up the book, and they show it to them right there in black and white where it says that. And they succeeded in shutting down, I think it was 5 or 6 stores, big ones, before they got wind and they had to get run out of town with guns pointing at them. But it was quite a great tactic. In New York, we blocked spray trucks that were poisoning everybody. A lot of the spray truck drivers were getting sick from the spraying themselves. California, they were spraying marijuana crops and marijuana fields. People shot down the helicopters. I'm not advocating or not advocating anything. I'm just saying what happened. And to try and get us to think about, to break out of the way of thinking that we have to only march in a street where nobody's watching and nobody's listening, and chant at windows where nobody is sitting, and then go home the next day, which is what a lot of the demonstrations are about these days. We can do a lot more than that. And just with friends, even with a small group of people, just be creative and have fun. And it's fun fighting against these bastards. It's like, if you don't enjoy it, what's the point in it, as well as doing something good for the world and for ourselves? So we are a prisoner of the universal price codes, right? The private patenting of everything. This is, I had put these on trees all around New York City when they were putting price codes on trees when they were trying to privatize the parks in New York and have them be taken over by or run by private corporations or named by private corporations. And this is from what it looked like during our fight against the spraying. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm just running through the last of the pictures I pulled out. This is the actual sheep meadow in Central Park. This is why it's not photoshopped. This is why it was called the sheep meadow. There used to be sheep grazing there. When we went to Prospect Park, the head of Brooklyn Parks, back when, like 15 years ago, and asked him to stop spraying in the parks, they go, well, what are we going to do? What can we use instead? And we said, well, why don't you use sheep? Well, why don't you use goats? And, you know, this picture was part of that. And they just laughed at us. You know, what? Use goats? Are you crazy? Blah, blah, blah. I tell this story in the book also. And now, finally, there were goats that were used the past few years in parts of Prospect Park who weeded the park in like record time. And and it was fun for kids to go up and see the goats at work and having fun and enjoying their life. So this is, this is part of the story of, there are all these, I don't know if you could see the cartoons from here. Can you actually see them? Yes. These are from John Jonick, who is, his main argument, in addition to being a great cartoonist, is that tobacco is the most pesticided plant on the planet. And there is something like, there's no tobacco in US cigarettes at all. It's all poison, synthesized. It's, unless you get the organic version of it. I don't smoke at all, but he does. And he smokes organic and his own tobacco. But the idea that people are told only that the tobacco itself is what's killing them, when it's also, additionally, and way more dangerously, the pesticides that are being used and the other chemicals that are put into these US cigarettes, again, which has no tobacco in it. So Mother Jones ran a great expose on that like 20 years ago, and they outlined the whole thing. But again, another thing that we don't know about.